people do when they have shame. They cover it up and they hid. They took leaves to cover up their nakedness because of the shame, and when they heard God coming, they hid because of the shame. And God has to say to them, where are you? God then has to look for them, and they have to come out of hiding because they were afraid and ashamed. And so God had to kick them out. Your lease is due. It's over. There's no way you could pay for rent anymore. It is time for you to go. And God had to kick them out of Eden. And it wasn't because God was unjust or unmerciful that he had to kick them out of Eden. He had to kick them out because they could have eaten from the tree of life and lived forever. But they wouldn't have, they would live forever in shame. Living forever in shame. It was mercy that kicked them out of Eden. Because God knew it doesn't matter if you live forever. If you live forever and you cannot live with yourself forever, that is a form of hell and not paradise. If you live forever and you can't get over your guilt, that is a form of hell. If you live forever and you cannot get over your shame, that's a form of hell. If you live forever and there's no way you can face yourself and live with yourself, that is not Eden at all. And that becomes a form of torturous living and a hell. God, out of God's mercy, kicked them out. Because before they can live forever, before they can have something like eternal life, they needed to be able to live with themselves first. And the only way they could live with themselves first is they would have to deal with who they are, see themselves for how they are, and learn to overcome the shame. It was shame that kept them out. When we return to this thief and this conversation, Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in Eden. And what Jesus did was, I don't know if Jesus was telling him, once we move on from this cross, you and I are going to end up in that garden, or if Jesus was also telling him another thing, which was this: I see you as you are, exposed, bare, and you are hiding nothing. There you are exposed, and you are acknowledging your guilt. You are acknowledging your mistakes. You are acknowledging your past. You are acknowledging that you probably don't deserve something better than this. And you are completely bare, exposed, vulnerable, and naked. And I see you and know it all, and I am taking away your shame now. And because he took away this man's shame, yeah, they're probably going to Eden later, but right at that moment, Jesus returned them to Eden. Because Eden was the place where you can be fully exposed, fully open, and be unashamed. Shame is what kills us sometimes. I'll share a story. I'm going to lighten this up, kind of. When I was a kid, and I was at the age of being able to kiss girls. I was afraid because I was told of mono, right? You know, mono, the kissing disease. I was afraid if I got mono, my mother was going to know. And I was kissing. Now, I know that there are other ways to get mono, but I didn't know that then. I thought, oh boy, if I get mono, I'm in trouble. Now, I wasn't thinking about the sickness and the trouble. It really cripples. I mean, it knocks you out. I think you're out of school for like weeks. You know, you get mono, you're done for a while, right? But I was so worried about what mono would expose me to. I mean, if I got it, then I would have to deal with the shame that I was doing something I probably shouldn't be doing at that young, tender age of God knows what, right? And then I would get yelled at by my pastor father and my, very pious mother. And, what are you doing how did you get mine? How did you get it? And I can't say, I got it because I was outside playing in the park. They would know because it's got a reputation being the kissing disease. And so they probably would know how I got it. And the fear of that was a very live fear for me. But what I'm trying to say is if I did get that disease, I would be probably more overburdened by the shame of it. That it would overtake me. There are certain diseases where the shame of the disease is dangerous. The disease can be deadly, but the shame adds to the danger of the disease. Now, there's a disease way more dangerous than mono. And yesterday was World AIDS Day, a day where the world is reopened again to the reality of AIDS. It's a terrible, deadly disease that's killing off a lot of people all over the world. And one of the reasons that disease was so dangerous was because when it first came around, it had so much shame attached to it. And because it had so much shame attached to it, people who had it couldn't admit to having it. And they couldn't admit to having it, so they spread it. And if they didn't spread it, they couldn't admit to facing it. Because if you admitted to facing it, the shame of it would be almost as unbearable as the deadliness of it. And the church, not this church, but church, capital C church, had a tough time when that disease first came out because it was so connected to shame. And we weren't able to be as compassionate as we could have been for people who got it because of the shame. And shame, in a way, can oftentimes make us dangerous to one another because we hide things about us that we are hurting from. We hide things about us that we are scared to expose. We hide things about us that make us in a bad mood, that make us touchy, that may make us unreliable. And because we can never fully be able to expose that to people, because we don't really have the trust in people, we sometimes end up hurting people in ways we don't even want to. And one of the reasons is because of the shame. And it is what the passage is showing us is before we get to a heaven after death. I don't know what that looks like. I hope it looks like, I don't know, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, I don't know, right? Before we get to after death heaven, before we get to after death Eden, Jesus was always about making the changes on this earth now too. And the Eden that we can return to is where we realize that Jesus sees it all. Yes. He sees our mistakes. He sees our fears. He sees our past. He sees what we're guilty about.